Sorry for my abrupt ending. I miscalculated my time. So we were talking about oxygen debt, that by using your muscles in exercise, and again, remember, strenuous exercise can be anything from running a marathon all the way to walking across the living room. All right, so don't think that it only occurs when you're doing some really big giant thing. Anyhow, whatever your exercise is, your muscles need large amounts of oxygen to make the ATP. Under low oxygen conditions, only glycolysis is used because that's the only one that's not oxygen dependent. So we're going to have pyruvic acid being made and built up. It's going to be converted to lactic acid. Most lactic acid is going to move to the blood, get carried to the liver, and from there, the lactic acid is converted back to pyruvic acid. The pyruvic acid is then going to be reconnected. The two halves are going to be reconnected to form glucose. Now, we said most of the lactic acid is going to be removed through the blood. However, any lactic acid remaining in the muscles must be broken down to carbon dioxide and water. If not, we're going to experience that cramping. During exercise, the oxygen levels are too low to do that. That's why we're having this conversation, because if we had enough oxygen, we would have gone through the citric acid cycle and the electron transport system, and we wouldn't have lactic acid built up anyway. So what happens after exercise? Extra oxygen is needed to take care of that lactic acid that remains in the muscles. Excuse me. This debt, this oxygen that's owed that we have to use to catch up, is repaid by heavy breathing after exercise. All right, so that panting, that you finish your run, you finish walking up the stairs and you're still kind of breathing heavy, that is caused by oxygen debt. Your muscles need more oxygen in order to get everything taken care of, to catch up and get that lactic acid broken down into the carbon dioxide and water that we need. That's one way that you can determine fitness. I know when I started running, it would take me, 20 minutes to stop panting like a dog. Now it's down to maybe 5 minutes or less, right? Because my skeletal muscles are more in tune with exercise. We've built up more mitochondria. There's probably more oxygen being stored in the muscle by the myoglobin. But again, it can be used as an indicator of fitness. Another homeostatic imbalance is muscle fatigue. What we mean by muscle fatigue is the inability of a muscle to maintain its strength of contraction. If you've ever held a heavy item, whatever it is, a child, a box, a book, whatever it is, for a long time, after a while, your arms start twitching and stuff. Your body is entering, those muscles are entering muscle fatigue. It's caused by extensive muscle use. The muscle is unable to meet its energy needs. It cannot make enough ATP to continue doing the work that it's doing. Well, what would cause a muscle fiber not to be able to meet its energy needs? Well, insufficient oxygen, right? Because again, if you can have all of the glucose in the world, you can have all of the mitochondria in the world, but if you don't have oxygen, those mitochondria are useless to you because you're not going to be able to use the citric acid cycle or the electron transport system. Depletion of glycogen. You've been using your muscles that all of the glycogen has been used up, and there's no glucose to be had in those cells, so I can't use the mitochondria. Even if I had oxygen, I can't use the mitochondria because I need the glucose. The other thing is a buildup of lactic acid. Anytime you build up any acid, it's going to decrease the pH of the cells. By decreasing the pH of the cells, you're going to have a shift, that's what's going to cause the cramping. Our third homeostatic imbalance is heat production. Excess heat is produced during muscular contraction. Excess heat is produced because of those chemical reactions that your body's going through. All of that ATP that's being used up, all of those chemical reactions release energy in the form of heat. This abundance of heat will be dumped by sweating. Your skin becomes flush. All of those things we talked about in the first week, talking about those homeostatic mechanisms. Now, there are two types of muscular contractions that we can talk about. The first is isotonic. An isotonic contraction causes a muscle to shorten. Think about your bicep. right? When your bicep contracts, it gets shorter, and that shortening pulls on your radius and ulna, causing your forearm to move. That's an isotonic contraction. This structure, this other structure we're referencing, is typically a bone. The tension is constant and energy is used. Obviously, energy is used because you're having one of these contractions that we've been talking about, and we go through a lot of ATP. So again, here we are, we've got a barbell. Your bicep is going to contract, pulling on your radius and ulna, causing movement. That's an isotonic contraction. We can contrast that with isometric contractions. These involve a minimal shortening of a muscle. Right? So if there's a minimal shortening of the muscle, will there be movement? No, because the shortening of the muscle causes the movement. Tension on the muscle increases greatly. There is no body movement. However, energy is still used. This is a silly picture, and I know I can find better pictures, but I keep it because if you look, what is this individual holding on to and pulling on to cause the isometric contraction? If you look carefully, it's not showing up really terribly clearly for some reason. That's barbed wire. I know when I need to do an isometric contraction, I find me some barbed wire. Anywho, isometric contractions come in and out of fancy in fitness. They're really kind of back in favor. Try to think of an exercise where you're not moving, but holy moly, you can feel those muscles working. Two really good examples are planks. Okay, you're not moving, you're just kind of perched there, and wall sits, right? When you slide down and just kind of do a squat against the wall. You are not shortening the muscle. There's no movement going on. Ideally, there's no movement going on. However, energy is still used, and you're going to feel that exercise afterwards. Muscular atrophy. What did we say? What happens to a word when we put an A in front of it? Not or non, right? So in muscular atrophy, it's a condition where the individual muscle fibers, the individual muscle cells decrease in size due to loss of myofibrils. There are a couple types of muscular atrophy. First is disuse atrophy, and this is kind of that concept of if you don't use it, you lose it. Muscles atrophy or shrink due to the lack of use. We can see this in those that are bedridden. If you have a limb that's in a cast or immobilized, that's going to result in disuse atrophy. Many years ago, I went through one of these kind of cycles where I was running a lot, and my muscles of my legs were really toned, right? I had good musculature there. Well, I went skiing in Vermont and broke a bunch of bones in my leg, and within about 48 hours from the time that I broke it and when they did surgery, I was in an immobilizer, and a lot of my muscle tone disappeared. Right? It took me 8 months to build it up, and in a couple of days it was gone. But that's what we mean by disuse atrophy. The other is denervation. The nerve supply to a muscle is cut, and you say, well, I'm just worried about the muscle. I'm just worried about the cells inside of the muscle. What does the nerve have to do with it? Well, hopefully you're thinking, well, everything, because how does a muscle know to contract? That impulse is coming across the synaptic cleft, the acetylcholine, our neurotransmitters, coming across and causing a change in the sarcolemma, the plasma membrane, and going down into the T-tubules. If we cut the nerve supply, the muscle will no longer get a signal to contract. It's raring to go. It might have plenty of oxygen, glucose, everything it needs, except it's not getting the signal. It's not being told what to do. Therefore, it cannot do anything. In this case, the myofibrils are replaced by fibrous tissues. So the thick and the thin myofilaments that we talked about, protein is a hot commodity. Protein is worth a lot to your body. So it's not going to just let it sit there and not be used. So what your body does is break down those proteins and replace it with a fibrous tissue. The problem with that is it is irreversible. Once the protein has been converted to fibrous tissue, there's no going back to protein. So this is why individuals who have had a catastrophic spinal cord injury will receive physical therapy, because we can physically manipulate those muscles to cause the contraction, because we don't know, right? Tomorrow there might be a cure for spinal cord injuries. We have no idea, we can't predict that. We want to make certain that should it occur, the individual will be able to get some use of those limbs back.